man leans forward and speaks. Not loudly, not forcefully. Just a single measured word released into the still air, and the stone answers. It does not echo in the way we expect. It does not fade into silence. Instead, it expands, unfolding through the darkness, slipping through corridors, rising into chambers unseen. The sound grows deeper, fuller, as if the structure itself has taken hold of the voice and begun to carry it, reshape it, amplify it. Within seconds, the entire temple is alive with that single tone. It is no longer a voice, it is a presence, and those standing within it do not merely hear it, they feel it. It moves through the chest, through the spine, through the bones of the skull. It hums beneath the skin like a second heartbeat, low and persistent, impossible to ignore. Some describe it as standing inside a bell just as it begins to ring. Others, as if the air itself has thickened, become charged, almost sentient. This is not imagination. This is a real place. Deep beneath the surface of Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, carved into stone over 5,000 years ago, lies a chamber known simply as the Oracle Room. A small niche, unremarkable at first glance. Yet when a voice enters it, particularly a deep male voice, it transforms the entire underground complex into something that defies modern expectation. A single sound, carried across an entire architectural network, no electronics, no amplification devices, no modern engineering, only stone and silence. How can this be? It is a question that unsettles more than it answers, because it forces us to reconsider something we take for granted. That ancient structures were passive, that they existed only as shelters or symbols or monuments to belief. But here, in the quiet darkness of this subterranean world, the stone does not behave passively. It responds, it shapes, it participates, and the implications of that are far more profound than they first appear. For centuries, the Hypogeum remained hidden, sealed beneath the earth, its chambers untouched, its secrets preserved in silence. When it was finally uncovered in the early 20th century, archaeologists were struck by its complexity: multiple levels, interconnected rooms, carefully carved passages. It was not simply a cave, nor merely a tomb. It was deliberate. Every wall, every curve, every chamber seemed to serve a purpose. Yet it was only much later that something far stranger began to emerge. Not from what could be seen, but from what could be heard. Researchers entering the oracle chamber began to notice an anomaly. Certain voices behaved differently here. Lower tones, particularly those in a narrow frequency range, did not dissipate. They intensified. They seemed to lock into the structure itself, resonating through corridors and chambers far beyond the point of origin. It was as if the building had been tuned, not for light, not for movement, but for sound. And not just any sound, a very specific kind, the kind produced by the human body. This is where the mystery deepens, because sound, in its simplest form, is nothing more than vibration, waves of pressure moving through air. These waves reflect, interfere, and interact with surfaces. In most environments, they scatter unpredictably, fading as distance increases. But under certain conditions, something extraordinary happens. The waves align. They reinforce one another. They begin to build. Physicists call this resonance, a phenomenon in which a system vibrates more strongly at particular frequencies. In such moments, even a small input can produce a disproportionately large effect. A whisper can become a presence. A single tone can fill a room, or, in this case, an entire underground temple. The Hypogeum, it seems, is not merely a structure. It is an acoustic system, one that selectively amplifies certain frequencies while suppressing others. One that transforms the human voice into something far more powerful than it would otherwise be. And yet, this raises a far more unsettling possibility. What if this was not accidental? What if the builders of this place, thousands of years ago, understood at least intuitively how sound behaved within stone? What if they discovered that certain shapes, certain volumes, certain proportions could influence how a voice moved through space? What if they experimented, adjusted, refined, until the structure itself became a kind of instrument? Because if that is true, then the Hypogeum is not just architecture. It is design with intent. Design that does not merely contain human activity, but transforms it. And if sound can be shaped in this way, then the experience of those inside the temple would not have been ordinary. It would have been immersive, overwhelming, perhaps even transcendent. Imagine standing in darkness, surrounded by stone that seems to breathe with sound. A voice emerges, not from a single direction, but from everywhere at once. It surrounds you, penetrates you, resonates within your body. It feels larger than the person who spoke it, larger than the space itself. It feels other. And in that moment, perception begins to shift. What you hear no longer feels like a human voice. It feels like something more, something beyond. This is where architecture crosses into experience, where physics begins to blur into psychology. Because the way we perceive sound is not purely external. It is deeply tied to the brain, to emotion, to memory, to meaning. A sound that fills a space can also fill the mind, and a sound that resonates through the body can alter how reality itself is perceived, which brings us back to that first moment. A man leans forward and speaks, and the stone answers. But perhaps the more important question is not how the structure responds. It is how the listener changes, because if a simple voice can awaken an entire structure, what else might it awaken within us? Subscribe to our channel if you love the content. What was first noticed in the silence of a single chamber soon began to echo across continents, not through sound this time, but through data. When researchers turned their attention beyond one site, beyond one temple, beyond one isolated anomaly, a pattern began to emerge, quiet at first, almost dismissible. A coincidence, perhaps, a quirk of stone and space. But the more they looked, the more difficult it became to ignore. In chamber after chamber, buried beneath earth and time, the same phenomenon appeared. Different cultures, different landscapes, different builders, separated by oceans and centuries, and yet the same invisible signature. In the ancient underground complex of Malta, tones in a narrow low-frequency band would bloom unnaturally, filling space with an almost physical intensity. Across the sea, in the rolling green landscape of Ireland, the great passage tomb of Newgrange revealed something remarkably similar. Deep within its stone corridor, certain sounds did not fade. They gathered. They lingered, as though the chamber itself resisted silence. Further still, in the English countryside, at the Neolithic site of Wayland's Smithy, enclosed stone spaces once again exhibited an unusual sensitivity to low-frequency tones. Not all sounds behaved this way, only specific ones. The rest dissipated, swallowed by the rough surfaces and open air. But those particular frequencies, they endured. When measured, recorded, and compared, the numbers told a story that was as precise as it was unsettling. Across these distant locations, the resonant frequencies consistently fell within a narrow band between 95 and 120 Hz, a range too specific to dismiss outright, a range too consistent to ignore. It was not a single perfect number, but a cluster, a zone, a kind of acoustic fingerprint shared across structures that had no known connection to one another, no shared language, no recorded exchange of knowledge, no visible thread linking their builders across time and geography, and yet the stones seem to speak the same language. At first glance, the explanation appears simple. Physics does not change with culture. Sound behaves according to universal laws. Enclosed spaces, especially those constructed with dense materials like stone, naturally produce resonances. The size of the chamber, the shape of the walls, the volume of the interior, all of these factors determine which frequencies will be amplified, and so perhaps these similarities are nothing more than coincidence. Similar structures produce similar results. The builders, working with comparable materials and spatial constraints, arrived unknowingly at the same acoustic outcomes. But the simplicity of that explanation begins to fracture under closer inspection. Because the range itself is not arbitrary, it is not just any frequency. It sits precisely within the spectrum of the human voice, not the full voice, but a very particular part of it, the lower register, the tones produced by the chest, by the resonance of the body itself, the kind of sound that is not merely heard through the ears, but felt in the ribcage, the kind of voice that carries weight, authority, presence. When a man speaks in that range, slowly, deliberately, the sound does not skim the surface of space, it penetrates it. It couples with the air, with the walls, with the very geometry of the environment. And in these ancient chambers, that coupling becomes something more. It becomes amplification. Suddenly the pattern takes on a different meaning, because if these spaces are most responsive to frequencies generated by the human body, then the structure and the body are not separate systems. They are interacting systems, one designed, or perhaps evolved, to respond to the other. This is where the mystery begins to deepen, because the implications stretch beyond architecture, beyond acoustics, into something far more intimate. Why this range? Why not higher frequencies, which are easier to produce and more easily heard? Why not the full spectrum of sound? Why do these chambers seem to favor the lower tones, the ones that resonate not just in air but in flesh? There is something almost biological about it, as though the stone is tuned not just to sound, but to us. The idea is difficult to accept at first. It suggests a level of sensitivity, of precision, that we do not typically associate with prehistoric construction. These were societies without modern instruments, without digital measurement, without formal theories of acoustics. And yet they carved spaces into rock that respond with remarkable consistency to a specific range of human-generated sound. Not perfectly, not uniformly, but with enough regularity to raise a question that cannot be easily dismissed. Was this discovered, or was it intended? If it was discovered, then we must imagine a long process of observation. People entering natural caves, noticing how certain sounds carried differently, experiencing moments where a voice seemed to grow larger, deeper, more powerful within a confined space. Moments that stirred something emotional, perhaps even spiritual. And over time, those experiences would be remembered, repeated, sought out. Certain places would feel different, more intense, more alive. And when people began to build, to shape stone rather than simply inhabit it, those memories might have guided their hands. Not through equations or calculations, but through sensation, through intuition. A chamber that felt right, a space where the voice came alive, a place where sound did not simply vanish into silence, but lingered, expanded, transformed. And if this process occurred in one culture, it could occur in another, independently, without communication, because the underlying principles, the behavior of sound, the response of the human body, are universal. Which brings us back to that recurring band of frequencies, 95 to 120 hertz, again and again, across distance, across time, a quiet consistency hidden beneath layers of stone and centuries of forgetting. But this is only the beginning of the pattern, because so far we have only considered the structure, the chamber, the walls, the geometry of space. We have looked at how sound behaves within these environments. But we have not yet asked what happens when that sound meets something else, something far more complex, something far more sensitive. The human body is not a passive receiver of sound. It is itself a resonant system. Bones, tissues, cavities, all capable of vibrating in response to external frequencies. the chest, the skull, even the fluid within the inner ear, all of it participates in the experience of sound in ways we rarely notice. Most of the time, this interaction is subtle, background, easily ignored. But within these chambers, at these frequencies, it may not be subtle at all. Because if the space is tuned to the voice, and the voice is generated by the body, then what happens when the two begin to align? When the vibration in the air matches the natural resonance of the human form, when the boundary between external sound and internal sensation begins to blur. It is here, at the intersection of stone and flesh, of physics and perception, that the question becomes far more difficult to answer, and far more difficult to ignore. Because the moment the body enters the equation, the experience is no longer just heard, it is lived. There is a moment in certain places when sound stops behaving like sound. It no longer drifts, no longer fades, no longer obeys the quiet expectation that every noise must eventually dissolve into silence. Instead, it lingers, it gathers, it holds its position in space as though it has found something to cling to. You hear it, and then you feel it, and then, quite suddenly, you realize it is not moving at all. It is simply there. To understand how this happens, we have to step away from the idea of sound as something fleeting. In truth, sound is structure. It is movement shaped by rules, waves of pressure traveling through air, expanding and compressing, colliding with surfaces and reflecting back into the space they came from. In most environments, these waves behave chaotically. They scatter, they interfere, they lose energy with every reflection. A voice spoken in an open field disperses almost immediately, swallowed by distance. But in an enclosed space, particularly one made of dense, reflective material like stone, those waves are forced into a kind of confinement. They bounce between walls, floors, and ceilings, crossing paths again and again, and under the right conditions, something extraordinary happens. The waves begin to align. Imagine two identical ripples moving across water, meeting at just the right moment so that their peaks and troughs reinforce one another. The result is not cancellation, but amplification. The wave grows stronger, more defined. Now imagine that happening not once, but continuously, in every direction, within a fixed space. The reflections do not interfere randomly, they begin to organize. At specific frequencies determined by the dimensions of the chamber, the sound waves synchronize with their own reflections. Each new wave arrives just in time to reinforce the last. Energy accumulates. The system feeds itself. This is resonance. And within resonance, something even more peculiar can emerge. Standing waves. Unlike ordinary sound waves which travel outward from their source, a standing wave appears almost frozen. It oscillates in place, anchored within the geometry of the space. Certain points in the room become zones of intense vibration, while others remain strangely quiet, as if the sound has been carved out of them. If you were to move slowly through such a space, you would not hear a gradual change in volume. You would pass through pockets of silence, and then suddenly, without warning, into regions where the sound swells dramatically, pressing against your ears, your chest, your bones. It would feel as though the sound exists in layers, invisible structures suspended in air. This is not metaphor, it is measurable, observable, repeatable physics. And yet when experienced directly, it feels anything but mechanical, because in those moments, sound ceases to be something you simply hear, it becomes something you inhabit. In ancient stone chambers, where surfaces are hard and irregular, where geometry is often enclosed and deliberate, these effects can become especially pronounced. Certain frequencies are encouraged, supported, sustained by the space. Others are rejected, scattered, absorbed into nothingness. The room, in a sense, makes a decision. It chooses which sounds will live and which will die. A higher-pitched voice may dissipate quickly, unable to find alignment within the dimensions of the chamber. It flickers briefly and disappears. But a lower tone, one that matches the natural resonant frequency of the space, locks in. It grows, it stabilizes, it fills the volume as though it has always belonged there. This is why, in places like the subterranean chambers of ancient temples, a single low note can feel overwhelming, while other sounds seem to vanish almost instantly. The structure is not passively reflecting sound, it is actively shaping it, filtering it, sculpting it according to its own internal logic. The stone becomes an instrument, and like any instrument, it has a voice. But unlike instruments we are familiar with, violins, flutes, drums, this one is not held in the hands. It surrounds the listener entirely. There is no separation between source and receiver. The person inside the chamber is both audience and participant, immersed in the field of vibration. And this immersion changes the experience fundamentally. Because when sound reaches a certain intensity, when it resonates within the body as well as the air, it begins to blur the boundary between external and internal perception. You no longer know precisely where the sound is coming from. It seems to emerge from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the floor, from within your own chest. It is no longer directional, it is environmental. In such a state, the mind struggles to categorize what it is experiencing. Our senses are built to locate, to identify, to separate signal from source. But here, those distinctions begin to dissolve. The sound is not over there, it is not coming from someone, it is simply present. And presence, when it cannot be easily explained, has a peculiar effect on human perception. It can feel larger than itself, more significant, more meaningful. This is where physics begins to brush against something deeper. Not because the laws of sound change, but because the context of experience does. A resonant chamber does not alter the fundamental nature of a sound wave, but it alters how that wave is perceived, how it is processed, how it is felt. A voice, amplified and sustained in this way, does not sound like an ordinary voice. It acquires weight, authority, a kind of gravity that pulls attention toward it, holds it there. And if multiple people are present within the same space, exposed to the same resonant field, something else begins to happen. Their experience aligns. They hear the same thing, feel the same vibration, exist within the same acoustic environment. Their individual perceptions begin to synchronize, not through conversation or agreement, but through shared sensory input. The space itself becomes the mediator, the unifying force. It is no longer just a container for human activity. It is an active participant in shaping that activity, guiding it, intensifying it. And this leads to a question that is difficult to ignore. If the structure can influence which sounds are amplified, if it can determine how those sounds are distributed through space, if it can transform a simple voice into something immersive and overwhelming, then it is not only controlling sound, it is controlling experience. Because sound at this level is not merely information, it is sensation, it is emotion, it is perception itself. And once that realization begins to take hold, the implications extend far beyond acoustics. They reach into the very nature of how environments shape human thought, how architecture can influence feeling, how carefully constructed spaces can guide not just what we hear, but what we believe we are hearing. Which raises a possibility that feels both logical and deeply unsettling. If sound can be shaped with such precision, if space can be tuned to amplify certain frequencies while erasing others, if the boundary between external vibration and internal sensation can be blurred so completely, then the question is no longer limited to physics. It becomes something far more profound. If sound can be controlled, what else can be shaped along with it? There is a place, deep beneath layers of stone and time, where a human voice ceases to belong to the person who speaks it. In the oracle chamber of Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, the air itself seems to listen. A man steps forward into the narrow niche carved into the wall. The space is small, almost intimate, as though it was designed for a single presence rather than a gathering. There is no grandeur here, no towering ceiling, no vast open hall, only a carefully shaped hollow in stone. And yet when he speaks, something impossible begins. The sound does not travel outward in the familiar way. It does not spread thinly and fade into the corners of the chamber. Instead, it gathers strength almost immediately, as though the walls are catching it, holding it, feeding it back into the space. Within moments, the voice is everywhere. It flows through corridors that twist beyond sight. It fills chambers the speaker cannot see. It moves through the structure not as a simple echo, but as a sustained presence, growing richer, deeper, more complex with each reflection. Those standing nearby feel it before they fully understand it. A low vibration settles into the chest, subtle at first, then unmistakable. It moves upward into the throat, into the skull, into the inner ear. The sound is no longer just arriving from outside, it is resonating within. It is as if the body has become part of the chamber. Observers have struggled to describe the sensation with precision, often resorting to comparison. One phrase returns again and again, like standing inside a bell, not as it fades, but as it rings. In that moment, the distinction between sound and space dissolves. The chamber is no longer something you stand within, it is something you are immersed in, something that surrounds and penetrates you simultaneously. And at the center of it all, a single voice. But it does not feel like a single voice anymore. The transformation is subtle yet profound. The human qualities begin to fall away. The familiar markers, direction, distance, individuality, are stripped from the sound. What remains is something larger, something that seems to belong to the environment itself. It is no longer clear who is speaking. The voice does not come from a mouth. It comes from the walls, from the floor, from the air. It comes from everywhere at once. And when a sound loses its origin, it gains something else, authority. Because the mind relies on context to interpret what it hears. A voice coming from a person can be questioned, evaluated, placed within a framework of identity and intention. But a voice that emerges from the environment itself is far more difficult to anchor. It feels impersonal, immovable, almost absolute. Inside this chamber, a single individual, standing in the correct position, speaking at the correct tone, can fill the entire structure with their voice, not through force, but through alignment with the acoustic properties of the space. To those listening, the effect is immediate and undeniable. Attention narrows, conversation stops. The mind, confronted with a sound that cannot be easily located or dismissed, begins to focus entirely on it. There is nowhere else to direct awareness. The voice becomes the center of perception, not because it demands attention, but because the environment leaves no alternative. And as the sound continues, something else begins to take shape. Emotion. There is a weight to the vibration, a depth that feels almost physical. It presses against the body, resonates within it, creating a sensation that is difficult to separate from feeling itself. For some, it evokes awe, a sense of standing in the presence of something vast and powerful. For others, it triggers unease, even fear, as the boundaries of ordinary perception begin to blur. The experience is not neutral, it is charged. And in that charged state, interpretation becomes fluid. A voice that fills a space in this way does not feel like an ordinary human expression. It feels amplified not just in volume, but in significance. Every word seems heavier, more deliberate, more meaningful than it would be under normal conditions. The speaker, whether they intend it or not, becomes more than a person. They become a source, a conduit, something closer to an embodiment of the space itself. And for those gathered within the chamber, the psychological impact is profound. Imagine standing among a group of people, all exposed to the same overwhelming field of sound. There is no escaping it, no turning away. The vibration surrounds everyone equally, synchronizing their experience in a way that conversation or shared belief never could. Each person feels it in their body. Each person hears it from every direction. Each person is, in a sense, held within the same invisible structure of sound. In such an environment, individuality begins to soften. The usual distinctions, who is speaking, who is listening, where the sound originates, become less important. What remains is the collective experience itself, and at the center of that experience, the voice. But it is no longer accurate to call it that, because the moment a sound becomes environmental, it ceases to belong to the person who produced it. It belongs to the space. It belongs to the structure. It belongs to something larger than any individual within it. This is the point at which the phenomenon moves beyond acoustics and into something far more complex. Because the human brain does not respond to sound in isolation. It responds to context, to environment, to the perceived source and meaning of what is heard. A voice that feels omnipresent is not processed in the same way as a voice that comes from a visible speaker. It carries a different kind of weight, a different kind of authority. And when that authority is reinforced by physical sensation, by vibration in the chest, by resonance in the skull, the effect becomes even more powerful. It is not just heard, it is believed, not necessarily in a conscious analytical sense, but at a deeper level of perception. The body responds before the mind has time to question. The experience feels real, immediate, undeniable. And in that moment, the line between external sound and internal response begins to blur. The voice shapes not only what is heard, but how it is felt, and perhaps even how it is understood. Which leads to a question that lingers long after the sound itself has faded. If a single voice, placed within the right environment, can take on this kind of presence, can fill a space, dominate perception, alter emotional response, then what effect does that have on the people standing within it? What happens to the mind when it cannot tell where the voice ends and where it begins? What do you think about this? Share with us in the comments section. There is a point at which the mystery leaves the stone and enters the mind. Up until now, the focus has been outward, on chambers, on resonance, on the strange behavior of sound within ancient structures. The phenomenon feels external, almost architectural, as though it belongs to the walls themselves. But the deeper truth begins to emerge when attention turns inward, because sound does not end at the ear. It continues. It becomes electrical activity, patterns of firing neurons, shifting networks of communication inside the brain. Every vibration that reaches us is translated into something else, something far more complex than pressure waves in air. It becomes perception, and under certain conditions, that perception can change in ways that are both measurable and deeply unsettling. In controlled laboratory settings, far removed from ancient temples and subterranean chambers, researchers began to explore a simple question. How does the brain respond to specific sound frequencies? Not music, not speech, just pure tones, precise, isolated vibrations delivered directly to the listener. Among those investigating this was Ian A. Cook, whose work focused on monitoring brain activity using electroencephalography, or EEG. Volunteers were exposed to a sequence of low-frequency tones, 90 Hz, 100 Hz, 110 Hz, 120 Hz, 130 Hz, while their neural activity was recorded in real time. At first, the results appeared unremarkable. Different frequencies produced subtle variations, as expected. The brain responded, adjusted, maintained its balance, nothing dramatic, nothing that would suggest a fundamental shift in perception, until one frequency was introduced. Around 110 Hz, something changed, not gradually, abruptly. The patterns of activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with reasoning, decision-making, and language, began to shift. The left hemisphere, typically dominant in analytical processing, showed a noticeable decrease in activity. At the same time, the right hemisphere became more pronounced. The balance had moved from logic to intuition, from structured thought to emotional processing, from language to something less defined. It was not that the brain shut down. It did not become inactive, quite the opposite. It reorganized itself, prioritizing different modes of perception. The internal dialogue, the quiet stream of words that accompanies conscious thought, began to recede, and in its place, something else emerged. A state less concerned with analysis, more open, more receptive, more experiential. This is not speculation, it is observable data. At a frequency that happens to fall directly within the range identified in ancient resonant chambers, the brain alters its behavior in a specific and measurable way. The implications are difficult to ignore. Because this is not about belief, it is not about culture or expectation, it is about physiology. The human brain, regardless of background or worldview, responds to certain frequencies in consistent ways. It is a system shaped by evolution, by biology, by the fundamental structure of neural networks. And when exposed to the right stimulus, it shifts, which brings us back to those ancient spaces. Enclosed chambers carved from stone, resonating most strongly within that same narrow band, roughly 95 to 120 Hz, clustering near 110. Environments where a low human voice can produce sustained, immersive vibration. Environments where sound does not simply pass through the ear, but surrounds the entire body. If a pure tone at 110 Hz can influence brain activity under controlled conditions, what happens when that frequency is not isolated but embedded within a complex, resonant environment? What happens when it is not heard through headphones, but experienced as a full-body vibration, reinforced by reflection, sustained by architecture, amplified by space? The question becomes more than theoretical, because in such a setting, the brain is not receiving a brief, artificial stimulus. It is immersed in it, bathed in it, held within it, and over time, that immersion may deepen the effect. The shift from analytical to intuitive processing may become more pronounced. The reduction in language-centered activity may create a kind of internal quiet, a suspension of the constant narrative that defines so much of conscious thought. In that quiet, other forms of perception begin to take precedence. Emotion becomes more immediate. Sensory input feels more vivid. The boundaries between self and environment may soften as the brain integrates the external vibration into its own internal rhythms. To someone inside such a space, the experience would not feel like a scientific phenomenon. It would feel like something else entirely, a sense of presence, a feeling of connection, perhaps even a moment of transcendence. And this is where the mystery takes on a new dimension, because the effects described in modern laboratories, shifts in brain activity, changes in perception, alterations in emotional processing, mirror, in striking ways, the kinds of experiences reported in ancient ritual contexts. States of awe, states of reverence, moments in which the ordinary boundaries of thought seem to dissolve, replaced by something more immediate, more immersive, more difficult to articulate. For centuries, these experiences have been interpreted through the lens of culture and belief, as encounters with the divine, as moments of spiritual insight, as connections to something beyond the physical world. But what if there is another layer to consider, not instead of those interpretations, but beneath them? A layer grounded in the interaction between sound and the brain. A layer in which certain environments, by virtue of their acoustic properties, create conditions that naturally encourage these states of mind. The possibility is both fascinating and unsettling, because it suggests that what we often think of as purely internal emotion, intuition, even spiritual experience, can be influenced by external physical factors in ways we are only beginning to understand. And if that is true, then the role of those ancient structures becomes far more complex. They are no longer just places where rituals happened. They are environments that may have shaped those rituals at a neurological level, whether intentionally or not. That question remains open. Did the builders of these chambers understand what they were doing? Did they recognize, even intuitively, that certain sounds produced certain states of mind, that certain spaces amplified those sounds in specific ways? Or were they guided by something more abstract, a sense that these environments felt different, more powerful, more significant, without fully understanding why? It is possible that the answer lies somewhere in between, a gradual process of discovery refined over generations, observations made not in laboratories, but in lived experience, a recognition that certain places, certain sounds, certain conditions produced effects that were valued, sought after, repeated, and eventually embedded into the design of the spaces themselves. If that is the case, then what we are seeing is not accidental. It is not random. It is the result of human beings interacting with their environment, learning from it, shaping it, and in the process, shaping themselves. Which leads to a question that is as compelling as it is difficult to answer. When ancient rituals unfolded within these resonant chambers, when voices filled the space and vibrations moved through the body, when the mind shifted from analysis to intuition, was this simply a byproduct of the environment, or was it the very point? Were these spaces unknowingly influencing the brain, or were they, in some way we have yet to fully understand, designed to do exactly that? There is a moment in certain environments when individual experience begins to dissolve into something shared, not through conversation, not through instruction, but through rhythm, through sound, through the quiet, almost imperceptible alignment of bodies responding to the same invisible force. Inside a resonant chamber, where low frequencies gather and sustain themselves in the air, the human voice becomes more than a means of communication. It becomes a tool, one that can shape not only the space around it, but the internal state of those within it. Imagine a group standing together in such a place. The air is still, the walls are close, heavy with age, their surfaces shaped in ways that subtly guide the movement of sound. There is no music, no instruments, no external cue. Only a voice. It begins low, steady, deliberate. A single tone drawn from the chest, carried on a slow exhale. At first it belongs to one person, but in a space tuned to that frequency the sound does not remain isolated. It expands, fills the chamber, returns to the ears of those present with a fullness that makes it feel larger than its source. Others begin to join, not because they are instructed to, but because the sound itself invites it. The resonance creates a kind of feedback loop. Each new voice reinforces the existing vibration, strengthening it, stabilizing it. The chamber begins to hum with a unified tone, a collective sound that no single individual controls. And with that sound, something else begins to align. Breathing. When voices synchronize, breath follows. In order to sustain the tone, each participant must inhale and exhale at a similar pace. Without conscious effort, the group begins to move together in time, lungs filling and emptying in a shared rhythm. This synchronization is subtle but powerful. Breathing is not just a mechanical process, it is deeply connected to the nervous system. Slow, steady breaths signal safety, calm, stability. They reduce the activity of stress responses, lower heart rate, and shift the body toward a more relaxed, receptive state. When an entire group breathes this way together, the effect multiplies. The room becomes quieter, not in sound, but in tension. The mind begins to settle, and as the resonance continues, another layer of alignment begins to take shape. Emotion. The low-frequency vibration, sustained and reinforced by the chamber, moves through the body in a way that is difficult to ignore. It is felt in the chest, in the diaphragm, in the bones. It creates a sense of depth, of weight, of presence that is not easily replicated in ordinary environments. At the same time, as modern neuroscience suggests, exposure to these frequencies can shift brain activity, reducing the dominance of analytical processing and allowing emotional and intuitive responses to rise. The result is a state in which feeling becomes more immediate, more vivid, more shared. In such a state, the boundaries between individuals begin to soften. The usual markers of separation, personal thoughts, internal dialogue, individual focus, become less prominent. What remains is the collective experience of the group, anchored in the same sound, the same rhythm, the same physical sensation. It is not that people lose their individuality. It is that their attention converges. The mind, no longer occupied with constant analysis, becomes more open to the present moment. The sound fills that moment completely, leaving little space for distraction. And because everyone in the chamber is exposed to the same conditions, their experiences begin to align. They feel the same vibration. They breathe at the same pace. They exist within the same acoustic field. This is not communication in the traditional sense, it is synchronization, a form of connection that does not rely on language but on shared physiology. And within that synchronization, something remarkable can emerge, a sense of unity, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived experience. The group begins to feel like a single entity, moving and responding together. The sound that fills the chamber is no longer a collection of individual voices. It is a single, continuous tone, sustained by many but experienced as one. In that moment, the space itself becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes an active system, a structure that shapes sound, guides breathing, influences neural activity, and, in doing so, brings multiple minds into alignment. The temple becomes, in effect, a mechanism for shared consciousness, not in a mystical sense, but in a physiological one. A place where architecture, acoustics, and the human body interact in such a way that individual perception converges into a collective experience. This convergence can be powerful. It can amplify emotion, reinforce belief, create a sense of significance that extends beyond any single person. It can make the moment feel larger, more meaningful, more real. And because it is grounded in physical processes, sound waves, neural responses, breathing patterns, it does not depend on prior belief to be effective. It simply happens. To those inside such a space, the experience might be interpreted in many ways. It could be seen as a spiritual connection, a moment of insight, an encounter with something beyond the ordinary. The language used to describe it would vary across cultures and time periods, but the underlying mechanism would remain the same: sound shaping the body shaping the mind, and the mind, in turn, shaping the experience. This raises a possibility that is both elegant and unsettling, that the environments in which these rituals took place were not chosen at random, that they were not merely symbolic or decorative, but functional, designed or discovered to create conditions in which human perception could be guided, aligned, transformed. The implications extend far beyond any single site. If such effects can be produced through the interaction of architecture and sound, then the role of these structures becomes far more significant than we might have assumed. They are not just places where people gathered. They are systems that influence how those people think, feel, and connect with one another. And if that is true, then the origins of such knowledge become a mystery in their own right, because to create such an environment, even through intuition, requires observation, experimentation, refinement. It requires an awareness, however implicit, that certain conditions produce certain effects. It requires someone at some point to notice, to recognize that a particular space changes the way sound behaves, that a particular sound changes the way people feel, and to connect those two observations into something intentional, which leads to a question that lingers in the silence after the sound has faded. If these environments could bring minds into alignment, if they could shape perception in such a profound way, who was the first to understand what they were doing, and how did they come to know it? Long before temples were carved from stone, before niches were measured and walls calculated, There was only the cave, a natural hollow, carved by water or time, dark and cool and silent. Early humans entered these spaces not with intention, but with necessity, for shelter, for warmth, for safety. Yet in that silence something remarkable began to emerge. A voice would echo, a clap of hands would return from the walls with a delay that was at first puzzling, then fascinating. A low hum would linger in the air, thickening and pressing against the chest in a way that no sound in the open could. These were not abstract observations. They were felt deeply in the body as vibration and pressure and resonance. They were experiences that could not be ignored, and it is here, in the quiet exploration of the cave, that the earliest experimenters were born. Not scientists in any modern sense, but observers sensitive to phenomena that defied their ordinary understanding. When a sound lingered longer than expected, it was noticed. When a tone caused a shiver, a laugh, or a sense of awe, it was remembered. And over generations, these reactions were refined, repeated, and shared. Imagine a small group huddled in a cavern. One person discovers that a deep growl or chant reverberates across the hollow in a way that a higher-pitched cry does not. The effect is immediate. The body responds before the mind can categorize the sensation. Heartbeats synchronize, breathing slows, attention narrows. And in that narrowed focus, a subtle sense of cohesion arises among those present. Without words, without instruction, the group has experienced something greater than themselves, a shared sensation, a moment of collective attention anchored in sound. Over time, these encounters would have been remembered not just as accidents, but as phenomena worth reproducing. Certain caves would become special, not for their decoration or their view, but for their acoustic properties. The spaces themselves would guide ritual, shaping when and where people sang, chanted, or called into the void. Observations would accumulate slowly, subtly, building an empirical knowledge entirely based on experience. From one generation to the next, trial and error would have refined this knowledge. The first experimenters were limited by intuition, not measurement. Yet intuition, honed over countless repetitions, can be extraordinarily precise. A small shift in position, a subtle alteration in tone, a slightly slower exhale, all of these could be observed, remembered, and repeated. And in that repetition, patterns would emerge. Low frequencies resonated more strongly than high ones. Narrow passages amplified sound in particular ways. Certain rhythms produced sustained effects on the group's attention and emotion. Even the emotional responses themselves became a guide. Fear, awe, exhilaration, reverence. These were feedback signals from the body and the group. A sound that produced excitement but also cohesion would be prized. A tone that caused discomfort would be avoided. Over generations, the accumulation of these observations would constitute an experimental record, encoded not in writing or numbers, but in practice, in memory, in ritual. The cave became a laboratory, the human body became a sensor, and the combination of space, sound, and attention became the first instrument of design. It is important to remember that these early humans were not consciously seeking to manipulate the mind in a modern scientific sense. Their objective was simpler, and yet no less profound: to explore the environment, to understand it, to find ways to make it serve social, spiritual, and emotional purposes. And yet, in doing so, they stumbled upon principles that modern neuroscience and acoustics are only now beginning to understand. Standing waves, resonance, synchronization of breathing and emotion, all of this was discovered not through theory, but through embodied experience. As centuries passed and stonework evolved from natural caves to constructed chambers, this knowledge could be translated into intentional design. The accidental became the intentional. A particular low tone that once reverberated unpredictably in a natural hollow could now be amplified deliberately in a carved niche. Wall angles, ceiling heights, cavity sizes, these parameters, once the result of natural formation, could be engineered. The same frequencies that caused awe and emotional alignment in a cave could now be reproduced in a purpose-built chamber, across generations and across miles, in ways that no one individual could fully predict. And yet, the method of discovery remained the same: observation, experimentation, feedback, repetition. It is a process that anthropologists recognize as central to human innovation. Trial and error in combination with acute sensory awareness leads to incremental mastery. Accidents are not dismissed. They are tested, refined, incorporated. Knowledge is encoded not in words, but in practice, in design, in the rhythms of daily life. What begins as spontaneous resonance in a cave can, over centuries, evolve into deliberate architecture capable of guiding the mind. Consider the implication. A single acoustic effect discovered by chance could ripple through generations. Practices that began as experiments with sound could be standardized, transmitted, and eventually codified into ritual. The chamber that once responded accidentally to a deep voice now becomes a stage for ceremony. The tones that once startled the body now induce trance. The simple human awareness of echo and resonance becomes the foundation for an entire architecture of altered consciousness. It is a process both biological and cultural. The body responds to vibration. The mind interprets that response. The group reacts collectively. And over time, that interaction between space, sound, and human perception is refined into systems of knowledge, encoded in stone, in ritual, in memory, and in tradition. What is remarkable is the subtlety of the transition. It does not require mathematics, theory, or writing. It requires attention, repetition, and sensitivity to effect. The early experimenters may have known nothing of standing waves or neural synchronization. They may have spoken of voices of the cave or echoes of the spirits. And yet they were already harnessing the principles of sound and perception. They were observing the invisible, feeling the intangible, and learning to shape experience in ways that would resonate across millennia. In this sense, the process of discovery itself is as profound as the results. It shows that human curiosity, embodied and iterative, can unlock insights into the natural world far beyond what seems immediately apparent. It also hints at a continuity of knowledge, an unbroken thread from intuition to design, from observation to mastery, from simple reverberation to the orchestration of entire chambers that can guide thought, emotion, and collective experience. And it is here, at the intersection of chance and observation, that the first real question arises. What begins as an accident, a playful shout into the darkness of a cave, can evolve over centuries into deliberate mastery of space, sound, and human perception. But who, among those first experimenters, recognized the potential? Who first understood that a voice could move stone and a chamber could move the mind? Across the globe, long before modern communication could bridge oceans, disparate civilizations were experimenting with the same invisible medium: sound. From the sun-bleached plains of Mesoamerica to the misty mountains of Asia to the wind-swept coasts of Europe, evidence emerges that human ingenuity repeatedly stumbled upon, and in some cases deliberately harnessed, the extraordinary power of acoustic architecture. The phenomenon is subtle, yet unmistakable. Independent cultures, separated by thousands of miles and countless generations, discovered spaces in which sound behaves unnaturally, almost as if the stone itself has learned to speak. In the great ball court of Chichen Itza, a single whispered word travels nearly the length of the 545-foot expanse. It does not dissipate gradually, but arrives intact, crisp and uncanny, as though someone spoke directly into the listener's ear. A clap of hands in the center of the court produces multiple echoes, each distinct and temporally spaced, creating a layered auditory illusion. There is even a curious phenomenon at the Pyramid of Kukulkan, where a single clap echoes back as the chirping of the quetzal bird, a sacred creature associated with both the deity and the monument itself. Here, sound is transformed, taking on qualities that seem almost supernatural, yet are entirely physical, the result of careful geometry, reflection, and resonance. Thousands of miles away in the temples of China's Shaanxi Wutai mountain, a different yet equally sophisticated system exists. Main halls in Buddhist temples, Chongshan, Xiantong, Shuxiang, and Bodhisattva Top, reveal a subtle command of sound. Simulations of indoor sound fields show how architecture amplifies ceremonial chanting while directing reverberation in ways that heighten communal focus. The height-to-depth ratios of these halls control the diffusion of acoustic waves. Pillars, strategically placed, create pockets of shadowed sound where vibrations linger, reinforcing certain frequencies while dampening others. During ritual, as monks intone chants and movements are synchronized, the space itself enhances the auditory and emotional impact of the ceremony, subtly guiding attention and experience. Meanwhile, in Europe, megalithic structures reveal the same fascination with resonance. At sites like Newgrange and Wayland's Smithy in Britain, chambers carved in stone produce sustained resonance at frequencies between 95 and 120 Hz, corresponding closely to the human voice. The effect is physical as well as auditory. Low male tones fill the chamber, vibrating through the walls and floor, stimulating the body as much as the ear. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Consortium documented these occurrences, noting that across these widely separated sites, the resonance patterns remain astonishingly similar. Despite differences in culture, materials, and climate, a recurring theme emerges. These civilizations each recognized that sound could be shaped, directed, and amplified. Whether through subterranean caves, constructed temples, or open-air courts, the manipulation of acoustics achieves strikingly similar results. Certain frequencies are favored. Spaces are designed to sustain tone and produce reverberation that aligns with human perception. Even the emotional and cognitive effects described in modern EEG studies shift from analytical thought to intuitive emotional processing would likely have been experienced by ancient worshippers, warriors, or ritual participants. There are echoes, both literal and metaphorical, that suggest a shared understanding of sound's potency. At Chichen Itza, the court produces multi-echo phenomena. In Malta, a single voice can fill the hypogeum as if the speaker had become the stone itself. In China, hall geometries create pockets of resonance that emphasize chanting and collective movement. In Ireland and Britain, standing waves at 110 Hz can dominate a chamber, producing vibrations that align group attention. Across cultures, a similar language of sound emerges, not codified in symbols, but inscribed in stone and air. What is remarkable is the precision with which these effects are realized, despite the lack of modern measurement tools. No lasers, no microphones, no computer simulations. Only observation, intuition, and meticulous experimentation over generations. Each culture, isolated by geography and language, appears to have arrived at similar acoustic solutions independently, guided by human physiology and the perceptible behavior of sound. This convergence suggests a universality. The same physical properties of air, stone, and human anatomy produce similar results wherever humans seek to manipulate sound within enclosed or semi-enclosed spaces. Yet the similarities extend beyond technical mastery. The emotional impact of these resonant spaces is consistent. Awe, reverence, fear, communion, transcendence. These are reported again and again across continents and millennia. A low hum in Malta produces the same physical and psychological effect as chanting in a Buddhist main hall or the whispers traveling across Chichen Itza's court. The experiential reality of resonance seems embedded not in culture, but in the human body itself. These spaces are not simply architectural, they are extensions of perception, amplifying sound in ways that shape thought and feeling, consciously or unconsciously. There is also evidence that ancient builders were attuned to subtle acoustic illusions. At Kukulkan, a single clap produces 9 echoes, each distinct, revealing an astonishing understanding of reflection, distance, and timing. In European megaliths, standing waves appear precisely where chambers constrict or expand, creating pockets of vibration that selectively emphasize certain frequencies. In Asia, halls are designed to create zones where sound energy is concentrated or dispersed, producing controlled effects during ritual movement. In every case, the principle is the same. Sound can be shaped as precisely as stone, and the experience of hearing can be sculpted almost at will. The repeated emergence of these phenomena worldwide suggests that there is a kind of proto-acoustic wisdom, knowledge discovered independently in multiple places, arising from experimentation and observation rather than transmission. The human capacity to perceive, test, and refine experience in space, amplified over generations, leads to convergent design. A whisper in one part of the world is answered by a chant elsewhere. A standing wave in a Maltese chamber finds its counterpart in an Irish tomb. A sound shadow in a Chinese temple mirrors the acoustic shadow in a Mesoamerican pyramid. The medium changes, the materials differ, but the effect remains the same. And so, a question arises that borders on the impossible. How did these distant civilizations, isolated by oceans, mountains, and time, converge on the same principles? Did human physiology, consistent across cultures, act as a guide, shaping experimentation towards similar results? Did the emotional and cognitive responses to low-frequency resonance provide feedback that directed design? Or was there something deeper, a universal intuitive understanding of how space, sound, and perception interact? Whatever the mechanism, the patterns are undeniable. Across continents, across eras, across languages and belief systems, humans discovered that sound can be more than communication. It can be architecture, ritual, and experience all at once. What begins as an accidental echo in a cave evolves into deliberate design, creating spaces that manipulate not only sound but attention, emotion, and cognition. Across civilizations, the same acoustic language appears, written in stone and air, waiting for anyone who listens closely enough to perceive its subtle grammar. And that leads to an enduring question, one that stretches from the deepest caves of Malta to the peaks of Wutai, from the courts of the Maya to the megalithic tombs of Ireland. When these discoveries appeared independently, what first guided human curiosity toward resonance? How could distant minds, separated by continents and centuries, arrive at such similar solutions to a challenge that was invisible, intangible, and experienced only through the body? The answer may lie in the intersection of human perception, stone, and sound, a convergence that seems even today both deliberate and inexplicable. Stone is usually thought of as solid, inert, unmoving. A wall stands, a chamber encloses, a roof protects, but in the hands of those who understood it, stone could become something far more dynamic, a tool, a medium, an instrument capable of producing sound, shaping experience, and guiding perception. Consider for a moment the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni Hypogeum. At first glance, it is a subterranean labyrinth of caves, niches, and passages. To the casual observer, it is architecture, perhaps ritual architecture, perhaps just an ingenious way to maximize space. But when a low voice enters the oracle chamber, the perspective shifts entirely. The walls are no longer barriers, they are mirrors, reflecting sound in precise patterns. The chambers are not merely containers, they are resonators, amplifying vibrations at frequencies that interact with the body and mind. The entire complex begins to behave like a single enormous instrument, tuned to harmonize with the human voice. This reimagining of ancient spaces reframes our understanding of architecture itself. In modern construction, we build for function, stability, and aesthetics. In these ancient temples, function includes physics, perception, and neuroscience, long before these disciplines existed as formal studies. Every corridor, every alcove, every ceiling curve may have been calculated, or at least refined through iterative practice, to shape the flow of sound. Stone becomes wood, becomes metal, becomes human, in a continuous spectrum of vibration. Walls are reflectors. They redirect energy, shaping how a sound travels through space. A chant uttered in a narrow passage may return to the speaker, enriched, magnified, or transformed, creating a dynamic interaction between voice and environment. Chambers are resonators, each cavity a distinct body with its own frequency response. Small niches like the oracle chamber resonate at around 110 Hz, sustaining tones that align with the human prefrontal cortex's sensitivity, subtly altering perception. Larger halls may produce more complex harmonics, layering tones in a way that supports collective chanting or synchronized movement. Geometry itself acts as a tuning system. The ratio of height to width, the angle of a wall, the curvature of a dome, each element influences the spectrum of sound, the duration of reverberation, the directionality of echoes. In this framework, the temple ceases to be a static building and becomes a playable instrument. It is responsive, interactive, alive. A voice, a clap, a chant, or even the footfall of a dancer can excite the chamber, generating vibrations that are felt as much as heard. The architecture is not merely passive. It guides the performer, reinforces certain frequencies, diminishes others, and in doing so modulates the experience of the listener. A skilled practitioner, aware even intuitively of the chamber's properties, can manipulate these effects deliberately. A single human voice can fill a space, dominate attention, synchronize group breathing, and shape emotional response. The temple becomes an extension of the human body, amplifying its capabilities and expanding its influence. The parallels to modern instruments are striking. Like a violin or a piano, each temple has a specific range. Certain notes are enhanced, others are dampened. Timing, rhythm, and intensity matter. The performer and the instrument are inseparable. In this case, the instrument is not wood and string, but stone and air. Not fingers and bow, but breath, voice, and movement. And the audience, the observers, the worshippers, the initiates, do not merely listen. They are incorporated into the sound, their own bodies resonating with the vibrations, their minds subtly altered by the frequencies that fill the chamber. This reframing opens a new set of questions. If these structures are instruments, who was intended to play them? Were they meant primarily for priests, shamans, or ritual specialists, capable of controlling voice and breath to excite the chambers fully? Or were they designed to include the wider population, turning communal chanting and synchronized movement into a form of participatory music, a collective performance that shaped shared consciousness? Perhaps both. Certain spaces, like the oracle chamber, may have been optimized for the skill of a single practitioner, while larger halls or open courtyards could engage entire communities, generating a resonance that aligned minds and bodies in a single rhythm. The notion of intentionality also extends to design choices across cultures. In Mesoamerica, the chirping echoes of Kukulkan suggest that builders understood not only reverberation, but also the transformation of sound into symbolic or semiotic forms, a clap returning as a bird call, bridging the physical and the spiritual. In Asian temples, the distribution of pillars and the proportion of halls guide acoustic diffusion, enhancing ritual chants while maintaining intelligibility and richness of tone. In European megaliths, standing waves concentrate energy in predictable locations, suggesting that the builders knew through experience, if not formal theory, where sound would flourish. Across these cultures, the underlying principle is the same. The temple is not a passive container, but an active participant in the performance. The instrument metaphor also explains the enduring universality of certain frequencies. Around 110 Hz, The human body resonates in a particularly sensitive range, the same resonance that induces trance, emotional openness, and communal alignment appears again and again in disparate structures. The consistency suggests that ancient builders, whether through intuition or observation, tuned their instruments to the human form, creating chambers that respond physically, cognitively, and emotionally to the same stimuli. When the temple becomes an instrument, ritual itself is transformed. Sound is no longer ancillary, it is central. Architecture, acoustics, and human physiology intersect to produce effects that are both measurable and ineffable. Chanting is not just performance, it is the act of playing the building. Walking through a resonant passage is not merely movement, it is interaction with a living system. Standing in the center of a hall is not simply presence, it is engagement with the soundscape, the vibrations, the emotional currents created by the chamber itself. And if the temple is an instrument, deliberately shaped to interact with the human body and mind, it raises a profound question. For whom was it built? Not only for gods or spirits, not only for the priestly class, but perhaps for the human nervous system itself, for collective consciousness, for shared emotion, for the subtle alignment of perception that allows awe, reverence, and transcendence to emerge naturally from the physics of space and sound. Who first realized that stone could be played as one plays a chord? Who first discovered that a low hum in a chamber could move an audience, synchronize a group, or guide thought and emotion? And when that knowledge was encoded into architecture, was it intended as a secret, a tool, or a gift, passed through generations, refined and ultimately experienced by anyone who entered the chamber in the right way? The answer remains elusive. But what becomes clear is that these temples are far more than buildings. They are instruments of perception, composed of stone and air, tuned by experience and activated by the human voice. And as with any instrument, mastery requires understanding, attention, and interaction. The space is not complete until it is played, until breath meets stone, until sound meets resonance, until the body meets the chamber. If this is true, then every ancient temple, every resonant hall, every sacred space is waiting for a player. And the question persists: who was meant to play these monumental instruments first, and who continues to hear their echoes today? In a resonant chamber, sound does not behave as it does in open air. It does not simply travel, it lingers, folds back upon itself, multiplies. A single voice carefully placed can dominate an entire space. And where sound dominates, attention follows. Where attention follows, influence emerges. Imagine a hall carved from solid stone, ancient and austere, illuminated only by slivers of filtered light. A group of worshippers gathers, their anticipation unspoken, their focus drawn to a central figure. The priest, shaman, or ritual specialist steps into the acoustic center, a precise spot chosen either through intuition or long experience. From here, his voice is no longer merely human, it becomes omnipresent. It fills the chamber from floor to ceiling, from one end of the hall to the other. The sound seems to originate from everywhere at once, vibrating in walls, floors, and the bodies of those present. To the listener, the voice is no longer a sound, it is an environment. This is the first lesson of ancient acoustics. Control over sound equates to control over perception. A voice amplified by the architecture of the space acquires qualities that transcend normal speech. It commands attention effortlessly. Words carry weight far beyond their semantic content. Silence, amplified by echo, becomes a tool as potent as speech. A pause can seem eternal, a single tone can feel infinite. In such a context, the speaker is less a person and more a conduit, a node through which the space itself communicates authority. The effects are both physiological and psychological. Low-frequency resonance, particularly in the range of 95 to 120 Hz, interacts with the human body in profound ways. It stimulates the chest, the diaphragm, even the skeletal structure, producing subtle vibrations that the mind interprets unconsciously. When combined with the neural shifts documented in modern studies, reduced activity in the analytical language centers, increased engagement of emotional and intuitive regions, the voice of the speaker becomes immersive. It is not just heard, it is felt, internalized, experienced. In such spaces, the ritual is inseparable from the architecture. A chant, a recitation, a single intonation is amplified, reinforced, and reflected by the chamber. The practitioner's body becomes an instrument, and the structure itself becomes an extension of that instrument. Worshippers experience the sound physically, emotionally, and cognitively, often without being aware of the mechanics behind it. Their attention is concentrated, their internal monologue quieted, their perception subtly guided by forces they cannot see. Across cultures, the same principle appears. At Chichen Itza, the echoes of the ball court allow a whisper to traverse hundreds of feet. The speaker's words, delivered from the right location, become omnipresent. In Malta, the Hypogeum's oracle chamber transforms a low male voice into a reverberation that seems to emanate from the stone itself. In European megalithic sites, standing waves amplify chanting, creating pockets of resonance that dominate the chamber. In each instance, the person at the acoustic center possesses a kind of invisible authority, one that is as much a product of physics as of social hierarchy. Authority in this context is multidimensional. It is spiritual because the effect inspires awe, reverence, and a sense of connection to something larger than the individual. It is psychological because the very structure of the sound reshapes attention, emotion, and cognition. The human mind, exposed to these resonances, shifts toward heightened suggestibility, empathy, and collective focus. Individuals are more receptive to guidance, more sensitive to instruction, and more likely to align with the group's objectives. Sound becomes a mechanism for shaping behavior, subtly yet powerfully. The implications extend beyond ritual. Control over acoustic centers could have been a form of governance, social cohesion, and cultural reinforcement. The practitioner's ability to command a chamber equates to the ability to direct emotion, to orchestrate experience, and to unify or influence groups. A chant or declaration is no longer simply symbolic, it is operational. It organizes attention, modulates mood, and enforces cohesion. Authority becomes inseparable from acoustics. The walls themselves assist in sustaining and magnifying influence. Yet there is a subtle, almost invisible dimension to this power. It is easy to mistake the effect for purely spiritual influence. The voice seems divine, the echoes godlike. But the mechanics are rooted in physical reality. Resonance, reflection, standing waves, and the human body's sensitivity to low-frequency vibration all combine to produce the impression of omnipresence. The divine quality of the voice is amplified by the environment itself. The temple, in effect, performs the speaker, ensuring that the intended effect is distributed evenly and consistently across all participants. This raises a provocative question. Was the use of sound in these spaces primarily spiritual, or was it a sophisticated form of psychological control? Perhaps it was both, inseparable and intertwined. The architecture, the ritual, and the human mind form a triad of influence. Authority emerges naturally from the interplay of these elements, whether acknowledged consciously or not. Those who first discovered the effects of resonance on human perception may have perceived it as divine inspiration, instinctively integrating it into worship. Others may have recognized the social power it conferred and used it deliberately to guide, instruct, or unify. Across cultures, the pattern is consistent. Wherever resonant chambers exist, where low-frequency sound dominates, where geometry amplifies voice, the individual controlling the acoustic center possesses extraordinary influence. The effects of sound on the body, the alignment of attention, the modulation of emotion, all of these reinforce the status of the speaker. It is a phenomenon that transcends belief systems, climate, and construction techniques. The medium is universal, the effect reliably human, And so the temple itself becomes a partner in authority. Walls, ceilings, niches, and corridors are not passive structures. They are active collaborators in shaping perception. They extend the reach of a voice, magnify its impact, and embed the speaker's presence within the very environment. Those who understood this interplay, through intuition, experience, or observation, were able to harness sound as a tool of leadership, control, and influence in ways that modern observers are only beginning to comprehend. The ultimate question is profound and uncomfortable. When a priest steps into a resonant chamber and speaks, does he speak to the gods or to the minds of those gathered? When the reverberation fills the hall and attention bends to the vibration, is it divine communication or a form of deliberate psychological modulation? Perhaps it is impossible to separate the two. Perhaps the power of these spaces lies precisely in that ambiguity, in the simultaneous spiritual and neurological engagement, in the inescapable convergence of awe, perception, and influence. In these chambers, the human voice becomes a force beyond simple utterance. It is amplified, multiplied, and distributed by architecture itself. It commands attention, shapes emotion, and aligns cognition. And in doing so, it transforms the practitioner from a mortal into an almost omnipresent presence, a conductor not just of ritual, but of the very experience of those within the space. Sound becomes authority, stone becomes amplifier, the mind becomes both audience and instrument. And the question lingers in the echo of every chamber. Was this sacred, or was it strategic? Or perhaps was it always both? What do you think about this? Share with us in the comments section. In the quiet darkness of a resonant chamber, belief begins not in doctrine, but in sensation. It is not words alone that shape conviction, but the body's response to its environment, and the mind's encounter with the invisible forces of sound and space. A chant, a hum, a low intonation reverberating at the precise frequency of 110 Hz reaches deep into the nervous system. It vibrates the chest, the bones, the air inside the skull. The individual perceives it as external, yet it resonates inside the body as well, blurring the boundary between self and environment. Modern neuroscience tells us that these frequencies do more than fill the ear. They shift neural patterns, subtly suppressing the analytical, language-dominated regions of the prefrontal cortex while engaging areas associated with emotion, empathy, and social connection. The individual listening experiences a temporary realignment of cognition. Thought slows, feeling sharpens, attention focuses. Every participant becomes more open, more attuned, more suggestible, not in the sense of weakness, but in the sense of heightened receptivity to the moment, to the ritual, to the shared experience. Within this altered state, emotion becomes amplified. Awe, wonder, fear, reverence. These responses are intensified by the interplay of sound, vibration, and architectural resonance. A single sustained tone can evoke a collective tremor of feeling experienced similarly by all present. Emotions, once private and fragmented, synchronize across the group. Laughter, tears, exhalations, sighs, and even the pounding of synchronized heartbeats are aligned, reinforcing the perception of shared purpose and presence. This is the emotional engine of belief. When the mind is aligned to the rhythm of the sound, when the body resonates with the space, the experience is encoded in memory with an intensity that ordinary daily life rarely achieves. High emotion creates strong neural encoding. It is why moments of awe, fear, or ecstasy are never forgotten. A ritual performed in a resonant chamber leaves an imprint not only on collective memory, but on the physical and cognitive framework of those present. Every vibration reinforces meaning, every echo reinforces conviction. Belief, then, becomes inseparable from experience. People do not simply adhere to teachings, they feel them. The ritual makes them real in a bodily sense. The The architecture, the sound, the rhythm, and the collective breathing act together to produce a state of awareness in which ideas are experienced rather than merely understood. Concepts of divinity, sacred authority, or communal purpose are not abstract. They are felt in every fiber, reinforced by vibrations that engage the nervous system directly. Consider the resonance of the oracle chamber in Malta. A single voice, expertly placed, transforms the perception of the space. The walls respond, the air vibrates, the sound folds upon itself, and the listener cannot help but be moved. It is not coercion, not manipulation in the conscious sense. It is an alignment of mind, body, and environment that creates an indelible impression. The ritual itself becomes inseparable from the response it generates. Each repetition strengthens the connection, reinforcing belief through embodied experience. This phenomenon repeats across cultures. In the Buddhist temples of Wutai, chanting within halls of precise dimensions produces prolonged reverberation that aligns practitioners' attention, synchronizes breathing, and heightens the emotional significance of ritual gestures. In Mesoamerican courts, whispers and claps interact with geometry to create startling echoes and auditory illusions, amplifying the perceived power of the ceremony and the authority of those conducting it. Even in European megalithic tombs, standing waves at low frequencies saturate the chamber, creating a deep resonant hum that resonates in the bones and mind alike. Across time and space, the mechanism is the same. Resonance, rhythm, and space amplify emotion, and emotion amplifies belief. The integration of sound and architecture transforms cognition subtly, yet decisively. The analytical, questioning mind recedes, replaced by a heightened capacity for emotional processing and social attunement. Empathy is increased, group cohesion is reinforced, attention is captivated. The combination produces a state in which belief feels immediate, unavoidable, and deeply rooted in the body. In this sense, the architecture and the ritual operate as a kind of psychological amplifier, transforming ordinary experience into profound conviction. It is impossible to overstate the significance of this effect. Memory and emotion are tightly coupled in the brain. Experiences charged with emotional intensity are recalled more vividly, more accurately, and with stronger personal relevance. A ritual in a resonant chamber does not merely teach, it imprints. The sensation becomes inseparable from the lesson. The human mind, tuned to frequencies and rhythms that enhance attention and emotion, encodes the ritual as an event of extraordinary importance. What is learned in such a state is never just knowledge, it is lived, embodied, and remembered. This leads to a subtle, almost philosophical question. Did people believe in gods, spirits, or sacred authority because of doctrine, or because of how these experiences made them feel? Were their convictions shaped by theological arguments, or by the body's visceral encounter with resonant sound and sacred space? The answer is likely neither exclusively nor merely. The ritual and the resonance created a feedback loop. Emotional intensity reinforced attention, attention reinforced participation, and participation reinforced belief. The architecture itself acted as an invisible instructor, guiding mind and body toward the experience that became conviction. Even the social dimension is significant. When entire groups are exposed simultaneously to these acoustic conditions, the emotional intensity is magnified. Shared resonance creates shared affect, producing what we might describe as collective belief. Individual perception aligns with the group, reinforcing conformity not through coercion, but through physiological and cognitive synchronization. Every vibration, every echo, every harmonic reinforces both the ritual and the social structure that sustains it. Over generations, the effect compounds. Communities built around resonant temples, repetitive chants, and ritualized movement internalize belief at a foundational level. Knowledge, tradition, and authority are encoded in the body as much as the mind. Ceremonies become self-reinforcing systems. The architecture, the sound, the emotion, and the collective engagement converge to produce enduring, almost inescapable conviction. In the end, belief emerges not solely from instruction or culture, but from the subtle interplay of physics, physiology, and psychology. The temples, the chambers, and the voices serve as instruments of cognition and emotion. The body resonates, the mind aligns, and the ritual becomes unforgettable. And so the question persists: did people believe because they were told, because they were instructed in doctrine, or because the very act of participating in ritual within a resonant, vibrating space made them feel the divine? Perhaps it is impossible to separate the two, for in these moments, feeling and understanding, body and mind, ritual and belief, all are fused into a single, powerful experience. For millennia, the mysteries of ancient temples remained locked in stone. Their secrets were felt, experienced, even revered, but rarely quantified. The chants, the echoes, the resonances, these were intangible, transient. Only the bodies of those present could perceive them, and only their memories could attempt to preserve them. For centuries, the mechanisms remained invisible to science. Today, however, we have tools that allow us to measure, simulate, and understand what our ancestors intuited with astonishing precision. Advances in acoustic modeling and computational simulation have begun to reveal the sophistication embedded in ancient architecture. Using software that calculates sound propagation, reflection, and diffusion within complex geometries, researchers can recreate the resonant behavior of temples long after they have fallen silent. In China, the halls of Shaanxi Wutai Mountains Buddhist temples have been digitally modeled using tools like SketchUp and COMSOL multiphysics. Researchers simulate how chanting interacts with room dimensions, pillar placement, ceiling height, and occupancy, producing detailed maps of reverberation times, first ray arrival times, and sound pressure distributions. The results are striking. Temples designed thousands of years ago manipulate sound in ways that align perfectly with what we know today about human auditory perception and emotional response. Take, for instance, the distribution of reverberation across the four main halls studied. The largest hall, at Pusa Peak, displays a T60 of 1.3 seconds at 2000 Hz, while the Xiantong Temple main hall reaches nearly 4 seconds for 500 Hz. These are not minor variations, they are precise acoustic conditions that shape the perception of space and sound. The diffusion of sound, the timing of first arrivals, and even the creation of sound shadows around pillars demonstrate that these halls are not mere containers of sound. They are carefully orchestrated soundscapes designed to emphasize, de-emphasize, and guide the auditory experience. Similar techniques applied to megalithic sites in Malta, Ireland, and Britain reveal resonance at frequencies between 95 and 120 Hz, particularly around 110 to 111 Hz, the same frequencies modern neuroscience identifies as capable of modulating prefrontal cortex activity. Computational modeling confirms that these chambers are capable of sustaining standing waves that amplify low-frequency tones and suppress higher ones, producing the same physical and neurological effects observed in contemporary EEG studies. Ancient builders, lacking formal knowledge of neuroscience or wave mechanics, nevertheless created structures that interact with the human body and brain in ways we are only beginning to quantify. Even the seemingly mysterious acoustic phenomena at Mesoamerican sites can now be explained through simulation. At Chichen Itza, the Great Ball Court and the Temple of Kukulkan produce multi-echo effects and auditory illusions, such as the chirping bird that returns from a handclap. Modern acoustic modeling confirms that these effects are not random. They arise from precise geometric ratios, surface angles, and distances that amplify certain harmonics while cancelling others. The same principles that govern modern concert hall design were understood intuitively by these ancient engineers and applied without the benefit of blueprints, calculators, or microphones. What emerges from these studies is a profound realization. Our ancestors were early acoustic engineers. They experimented, observed, and refined techniques across generations, building knowledge not in books but in practice, memory, and tradition. They achieved levels of precision that only now can be verified scientifically. The intuitive discoveries of early humans, resonance in caves, amplification of voice, alignment of sound with ritual, have been encoded into stone with a rigor and consistency that modern modeling can only marvel at. The implications are staggering. Structures once dismissed as simple ceremonial halls, tombs, or temples are now understood as instruments, laboratories, and machines for human cognition. They manipulate perception, emotion, and memory through the interaction of sound, space, and human physiology. Modern simulations confirm what ancient intuition achieved. Chambers are tuned, frequencies are deliberate, and architecture is inseparable from experience. Yet, the more we learn, the more we recognize how little we truly understand. Even with the most advanced simulations, many subtleties remain elusive. How did ancient builders determine precise chamber dimensions and angles? How did they understand the interaction of multiple frequencies in complex spaces? How did they incorporate environmental variables, the thickness of walls, the density of stone, the shape of niches, and the behavior of sound across distances? These are questions that science can model, but cannot fully answer without knowledge of the human decision-making, experimentation, and observation that produced them. Furthermore, the experiential dimension remains largely intangible. Simulations can measure reverberation times, standing waves, and pressure distributions, but they cannot fully replicate the psychological, emotional, and social effects of sound on groups of humans. They cannot recreate the feeling of a voice vibrating through the bones, or the awe induced by a whisper filling a vast chamber. They cannot reproduce the altered states of consciousness induced by repeated exposure to low-frequency resonance. There is a dimension of experience that is both scientific and ineffable, bridging physics and perception, body and mind. The growing field of archaeoacoustics reminds us that ancient human ingenuity often transcends the assumptions of modern science. Where we might expect trial and error, we find deliberate manipulation. Where we anticipate accident, we uncover precision. Where we presume superstition, we detect an intuitive understanding of the interaction between sound, space, and human perception. Technology confirms what ancient intuition discovered, yet simultaneously exposes the limits of our comprehension. As we peer into these simulations, a new appreciation emerges. These were not merely builders, masons, or ritual specialists. They were experimenters, observers, and artists of perception. They worked with the physical world as both medium and message, encoding complex phenomena into structures that survive to this day. Their tools were stone, air, voice, and the human body. Their laboratory was the chamber itself. And the results, confirmed by modern science, are nothing short of extraordinary. And still, every discovery raises further questions. If we are only now beginning to understand the acoustic mastery embedded in temples, halls, and tombs, what else might we have overlooked? What other mechanisms, subtle, deliberate, and invisible to the casual observer, lie hidden in the architecture of ancient civilizations? What other effects, whether neurological, emotional, or perceptual, have been encoded in stone and vibration, waiting for science to catch up? Modern technology illuminates only a fraction of what ancient humans achieved intuitively. Their structures resonate not just with sound, but with the human mind, shaping experience across millennia. The deeper we probe, the more we realize that our ancestors were architects of perception, and that every stone, every angle, every chamber is part of a grand experiment we are only beginning to decode. The question is no longer simply how they built these temples or why they built them, but what other knowledge, hidden in vibration and geometry, remains beyond our current understanding. If intuition could achieve so much, what other truths have been waiting silently, encoded in stone, for
for us to discover. Across the continents and millennia, a pattern emerges that demands attention. Malta, Ireland, Britain, Mesoamerica, China, ancient builders, separated by thousands of miles and centuries, all arrived at remarkably similar acoustic phenomena. Chambers resonate at 95 to 120 Hz, often clustering near 110 or 111 Hz. Sound travels and transforms in ways that align with human physiology and perception. Low tones vibrate the body, alter prefrontal cortex activity, and heighten emotion and empathy. The convergence is undeniable. But how should we interpret it? Was it a matter of coincidence, an accidental discovery through trial and error, or the product of deliberate, intentional engineering? The simplest explanation, and the one often first proposed, is coincidence. Perhaps humans everywhere are drawn to enclosed stone spaces. Perhaps low-frequency tones naturally sustain in caves and chambers, creating resonance simply as a byproduct of materials and dimensions. Humans, curious and ritualistic by nature, may have interpreted these echoes as sacred or meaningful, giving rise to ceremonial use. Across time, observers would have noticed which spaces worked better, chanting and ritual naturally gravitating toward chambers that amplified voice or created a sense of awe. From this perspective, the similarities are statistical,
arising from the limited ways sound interacts with hard surfaces. Resonance is inevitable in certain shapes. The human vocal range coincides with those resonant frequencies. Emotion follows naturally from physical vibration. Yet coincidence alone fails to explain the astonishing precision observed. The repeated emergence of 110 to 111 Hz as a favored resonance across diverse sites seems improbable, if purely accidental. In the Hypogeum of Malta, the oracle chamber produces sustained resonance across multiple levels of the subterranean complex. At Chichen Itza, the ball court amplifies whispers across hundreds of feet, and claps return as a bird's song. In Wutai mountain temples, careful proportioning of height, depth, and pillar placement modulates acoustic diffusion with remarkable consistency. These effects are not random. They require awareness of geometry, distance, and material properties. Coincidence cannot easily account for the convergence of architectural sophistication, acoustic function, and neurological impact. A second interpretation is empirical discovery through observation and experimentation. Early humans, experimenting in caves and natural formations, would have noticed echoes, amplification, and standing waves. Certain tones excited particular cavities, others dissipated quickly. Over generations, repeated experimentation would allow these communities to refine spaces, discovering principles without formal theory. Trial and error, observation of cause and effect, and iterative adjustment could produce the precise acoustic environments we observe today. Resonance might have been learned behavior, emerging organically from experience rather than imposed through abstract design. This explanation has strong appeal because it accounts for human learning processes. People are observant, pattern-seeking creatures. Rituals, chants, and communal activities would provide continuous feedback on which spaces enhanced experience and which did not. Over time, a community could encode highly effective acoustic configurations into their construction practices. This interpretation also accommodates variation. No two chambers are exactly alike, yet their functional principles converge. Empirical discovery allows for differences in materials, culture, and local geology, while still producing the remarkable similarities in frequency and resonance observed worldwide. The most provocative interpretation, however, is intentional engineering. Here, ancient builders were not relying on chance, intuition alone, or generational learning. They deliberately designed spaces to achieve specific acoustic effects. Geometry, proportions, material selection, and chamber orientation were chosen with the understanding that certain frequencies could alter perception, influence emotion, and synchronize groups. In this framework, the resonances near 110 Hz are not incidental, they are deliberate. The temples, halls, and subterranean chambers become instruments, tools for guiding consciousness and experience. Authority, ritual, and collective belief are amplified by architecture that is consciously tuned to the human body and brain. Evidence supporting intentionality is compelling. Across cultures, the same patterns appear in settings separated by vast distances, yet the phenomena are consistent. Modern EEG studies suggest that low-frequency resonance at these sites can shift prefrontal cortex activity, suppress language, and enhance emotional processing. The locations of acoustic sweet spots within chambers, the precise height-to-depth ratios in halls, and the careful alignment of corridors and niches all suggest more than trial and error. Even small details such as the strategic placement of pillars or the shaping of ceilings produce measurable differences in reverberation and sound diffusion. These are not arbitrary, they are deliberate interventions to modulate acoustic experience. Yet even this interpretation must be approached with caution. We cannot assume that ancient builders understood neuroscience as we do. They likely lacked the vocabulary to describe brain regions, frequencies, or standing waves. Their knowledge would have been intuitive, observational, and experiential, encoded in practice rather than in theory. Intentionality may have been real, but it operated within the context of human perception, ritual efficacy, and aesthetic judgment. The builders may have known that certain designs produced awe, reverence, or group alignment, even if they did not understand why in modern scientific terms. The three possibilities, coincidence, empirical discovery, and intentional engineering, each have weight. Coincidence is possible, but struggles to explain the repeated precision. Empirical discovery accounts for learning and adaptation, but cannot fully explain the sophisticated geometric consistency observed across cultures. Intentional engineering is plausible, yet requires accepting that our ancestors were intuitively manipulating factors we only now understand scientifically. Perhaps the truth incorporates elements of all three: intuitive observation leading to empirical refinement, culminating in intentional practice. What is striking and disquieting is that these possibilities challenge assumptions about human cognition and capability. Ancient builders may have been more perceptive than previously credited, their understanding of space, vibration, and human experience more sophisticated than we have acknowledged. Yet we are also forced to confront uncertainty. Even with modern modeling, measurements, and neuroscience, we cannot fully resolve the question. The evidence points in multiple directions simultaneously, defying a simple conclusion. And perhaps that ambiguity is exactly the point. The very mystery of these spaces, their capacity to awe, to manipulate perception, to synchronize emotion, to amplify authority, persists precisely because it is not reducible to a single cause. Whether coincidence, empirical insight, or deliberate engineering, the result is the same. Ancient humans created environments that shape experience at a profound physiological and emotional level. The effect transcends explanation, inviting reflection on the depth of human ingenuity, the subtlety of perception, and the intersection of mind, body, and architecture. The answer may not be simple, it may not be comfortable. Perhaps these resonant chambers were born from the accidental discovery of echoes, refined over generations into instruments of perception, and ultimately codified into deliberate practice. Or perhaps the builders possessed an intuition so precise that it approaches modern scientific understanding without ever naming the underlying principles. Either way, the implications are immense. Across time, space, and culture, human beings found a way to shape not just structures, but consciousness itself, through the subtle and extraordinary medium of sound. And so we are left at the threshold of understanding, confronted with the interplay of chance, discovery, and design. Each interpretation illuminates part of the story while leaving other parts unresolved. What we do know is that these ancient spaces continue to speak to us, not only through their stone and echo, but through the evidence of the human mind they were built to engage. The question remains, did they arise by coincidence, emerge through experimentation, or spring from deliberate intuitive genius? The answer, perhaps, is all three, and perhaps none. Human consciousness is often imagined as something ethereal, a phenomenon arising solely from neurons firing, synapses sparking, thoughts emerging. Yet the discoveries within resonant chambers suggest a different perspective, that our minds are not isolated from the physical world, but intimately entwined with it, attuned to frequencies, vibrations, and the very textures of the environment we inhabit. When a chamber resonates at around 110 Hz, it does not merely carry sound, it engages the human nervous system, altering perception, modulating emotion, and transforming cognition. This frequency, recurring across civilizations and continents, hints at a fundamental link between human awareness and vibration itself. Modern neuroscience provides a partial explanation. EEG studies demonstrate that exposure to frequencies in the range of 110 Hz can shift activity in the prefrontal cortex, quieting language centers and enhancing regions associated with mood, empathy, and social alignment. Low-frequency resonance felt in the chest and bones interacts with the body on a somatic level. The sensation is immersive, compelling, and difficult to resist. Thought slows, attention focuses, emotion heightens. In essence, consciousness itself is subtly nudged by the physics of vibration. It is as if our minds are designed to respond to certain harmonics, certain pulses of energy, in ways that amplify awareness of the moment, social connection, and emotional intensity. The consistency of this frequency across ancient structures raises profound questions. Were these ancient builders attuned to something intrinsic in human perception? Did they discover through observation and ritual that the body and mind respond to specific vibrational patterns? And if so, what does that say about consciousness itself? Perhaps it is not only a product of neural complexity, but a system that resonates with external stimuli, a mind that is literally in dialogue with the world around it. The physical, the mental, and the spiritual converge at the intersection of frequency. This idea invites a radical shift in perspective. If the brain responds predictably to certain vibrations, then our perception of reality may be more malleable than previously thought. Sound, as a physical phenomenon, can alter how we feel, how we think, and even how we interpret the world. A chant, a bell, a voice, a hum, these are not mere ornaments of ritual. They are instruments that shape awareness, tools for navigating perception, and methods for accessing altered states of consciousness. In this framework, resonance is not incidental, it is fundamental. Consciousness itself has a rhythm, and the universe responds when that rhythm is engaged. Ancient temples, then, are more than structures, they are laboratories for consciousness. Their chambers, halls, and niches are tuned not only for acoustic effect, but for cognitive effect. Stone walls, air columns, and architectural proportions converge to create conditions in which the mind enters heightened states. The low hum of a resonant chamber, the echo of a voice folded upon itself, the precise timing of reflections, all of these produce a physiological response that aligns perception with emotion, focus, and social attunement. The builders may not have known the neural basis of their craft, yet their intuitions align uncannily with modern science, suggesting that human consciousness has always been deeply responsive to vibration. But why this particular frequency? Why does 110 Hz, repeated across cultures and continents, provoke such reliable effects? It may be that this range coincides with the resonant properties of the human body. Bones, muscles, and cavities in the thorax respond to low-frequency vibration in ways that amplify somatic sensation. The voice itself, naturally produced in similar frequencies, interacts with these chambers to create standing waves that are perceptible both externally and internally. From a phenomenological standpoint, the experience is holistic. Mind, body, and environment become a single resonant system. The architecture does not simply contain consciousness, it participates in it. The implications extend beyond archaeology and neuroscience into the nature of reality itself. If human awareness is attuned to particular frequencies, then the way we perceive the world may always be contingent upon vibrational phenomena. Sight and sound are merely gateways. Resonance may be the medium through which perception itself is shaped. The patterns ancient builders encoded into stone may reflect a profound understanding, whether conscious or intuitive, that reality is not neutral, but structured. That experience is not passive, but can be guided, amplified, and transformed through the interaction of frequency and consciousness. Consider the philosophical weight of this notion. If vibration can shape thought, feeling, and social alignment, then consciousness is inseparable from the rhythms of the world. We are not merely observers, we are participants in a vibratory universe. The boundaries between external and internal object and subject, self and environment begin to blur. A resonant chamber, a single tone, a human voice, these become portals through which awareness is engaged and expanded. The ancient builders may have intuited this truth, encoding it into stone as a way to explore, shape, and amplify the human mind. And yet the question persists. Is this insight unique to specific civilizations, or does it reveal something universal about consciousness itself? If so many cultures, separated by oceans and time, discovered the same acoustic principles, perhaps it is not merely a product of culture, trial, or ritual. Perhaps it points to an underlying structure of perception, a vibratory foundation to awareness that transcends history. The ancient chambers are then not just historical artifacts, they are demonstrations of a principle as old as humanity itself, that consciousness resonates, that awareness is influenced by rhythm, that reality itself may be tuned to frequencies we are only beginning to comprehend. This line of inquiry reframes every encounter with these spaces. The Hypogeum, the ball court of Chichen Itza, the megalithic halls of Europe, the Buddhist main halls of Wutai. They are not simply monuments of culture, religion, or engineering. They are instruments designed to engage perception, to modulate cognition, and to evoke emotion. They are evidence that human experience can be guided not through coercion or doctrine alone, but through the precise alignment of vibration, architecture, and mind. The philosophical implication is staggering. Consciousness may be a system inherently attuned to the world's vibratory patterns and what we call spiritual experience. Ritual ecstasy or profound awe may be a natural response to resonance. The chambers of ancient temples are, in this sense, mirrors not just of culture, but of the human mind itself, its responsiveness, its rhythms, its alignment with the unseen structures of reality. And so we are left with a question that is both scientific and existential. When we witness the effects of these resonant frequencies, are we uncovering a lost secret of ancient civilizations, or are we glimpsing a universal truth about consciousness, perception, and the vibratory nature of reality? Perhaps the answer is both, intertwined across time and space, awaiting recognition in the stillness of stone, the resonance of air, and the vibration within ourselves. If this is true, then every frequency we encounter, every echo in a hall, every tone produced by human breath is not incidental. It is part of a dialogue, a resonance that shapes perception and awareness. The chamber is not just a space, the sound is not just a sound, and the experience is not just ritual. It is a meeting between mind, matter, and vibration, a glimpse of the underlying harmony between human consciousness and the world it inhabits. And so the question lingers in the silence between echoes. Are we rediscovering something that ancient civilizations already knew? Or are we uncovering a principle of perception that is universal, timeless, and intrinsic to the human mind itself? Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the universe on frontiers of infinity. If this glimpse into the unknown has sparked your curiosity, be sure to subscribe and join us, where we unravel the darkest mysteries of space.